Assalamu alaikum. So we've got Molana Osman Kazee, also known as Obi Kazee, in the studio today. He's the author of the new children's book, 7 Down, 6 Up. So in the last podcast, he made some very relevant and good points about the Maktab system. So I'm going to ask him to elaborate on those points.
Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. So, where do I start? Let me make it very clear that I am part of the Maktab system. I am a product of the Maktab system, and I have been teaching in the Maktab system for almost 30 years now. So I'm not an outsider. Now, the problem that we have in the Ummah, for whatever reason, we've morphed into these people who are unable to take criticism, and in all kind of facets of the Islamic community, it's like criticism is a no-go area. You can't criticize anyone or anything. You can't criticize a personality. You can't criticize an institute. But if you look at the world, the secular world, the non-Islamic world, one of the reasons why they have progressed so well and so much is because they have critics. They allow criticism. They welcome criticism. And so in the culinary world, you have food critics, which is why they've been able to excel in the culinary field so much. French cuisine. I mean, these are people, the Europeans are people who were eating vegetables, potatoes, and carrots once upon a time, right? And now French cuisine is like the sought after thing, the most expensive cuisine in the world, and you get these menus that you can't even pronounce, and people travel all over the world to eat the food. And so they've progressed so much in that field simply because they allowed food critics and restaurant critics, and they opened the doors and welcome those critics. And so the critics would come and review the place, and they'd take the advice on board, and they take the criticism and then reflect upon it. Has this person got a valid point? If he has, then what do we need to do to improve? And so you get food critics, you get film critics, you get book critics, people who write reviews and criticize Broadway performances, West End plays, and you know the list is endless. And even in the school system, they have Ofsted. In the hospital system, they have, I don't know what the organization is called, but you know they have people coming in to review and to check and to criticize. But unfortunately, in our culture now, this wasn't the case in the past. So it's not an Islamic thing. I think it's a cultural thing. We have a culture now in the Ummah where no one is able to criticize anyone or anything, and therefore there's very little progress made. And so we're making progress on the back of whatever we have inherited from our predecessors. Right? Now, you've got to accept that there are two kinds of criticism. One is spiteful criticism, and the other is constructive criticism. Obviously, spiteful criticism, there's no place for it, and it's just a product of jealousy and hatred and whatever. But then there's constructive criticism, the eye of the critic, the constructive criticism which he gives with impartiality and without bias. That's a very useful tool for progression. It's what helps us move forward. So you have a critic who's judging in order to promote progression and growth. That should be allowed, and that should be promoted, and that should be encouraged. But unfortunately, in the Ummah, more often than not, that's not allowed. So, for example, in Tabligh, right, I can speak about these things because Alhamdulillah, I'm affiliated to some degree to Tabligh and also to the Zikr circles, and also the Madrassa system. I'm also a product of the Darulum system. So I'm not an outsider, alhamdulillah, and so I can talk about these things. I know what I'm talking about. So, for example, if somebody's in Tabligh and then they start picking up the weaknesses that have developed in the work which were not present in the past. Our predecessors, they held the work to a very high standard, and they gave a lot of sacrifice, and they steered the ship in the right direction, and they didn't let any kind of digression or weakness come into the effort, and they protected the effort at all costs. But now there are faults that have developed in Tabligh and in the Zikr Tasawwuf circles and in Darulums, in Maktabs and everything. But if I'm a Tablighi, if I start criticizing, people will say, oh, he's fallen out of Tabligh, he spent time once upon a time, but now he's anti-Tablighi. Or Zikr, Zikr circles, if Zikr is, mashallah, tasawwuf and zikr circles, very, very important, tablighi work, very, very important. But if the people who are engaged in those activities are now not of the same caliber of their predecessors, and if they are not abiding by the rules, then they should be held up for criticism, and they should be held to account. So, for example, in one particular zikr circle, and a scholar who was part of that before he left them, then he distanced himself from them, and then he criticized them. He said that he accused them of hero worshipping their Pir Sahib, their leader. They said, you're hero worshipping him, and you've made this personality above fault and above reproach. You've made him like a godly person, right? And you made him like a godly character, and you're like hero worshipping him, and so your movement has become a cult. So these were accusations, allegations leveled at that thing, at that particular group, and instead of taking it on board, they just slated the alim, So and he was ostracized, but he left them anyway. But he was never allowed back in, and all this sort of stuff. So then, where's the progression going to be? What should have been the correct approach is that they should have reflected upon his criticism, and where he was right. I mean, he's an alim, and why would he criticize something that he is part of? He's only criticizing it because, in the light of his knowledge, the knowledge that he's acquired, he sees deviation, and he sees that there is becoming a cult. So that's why he risked his reputation and his friend circle, and then he raised the points. So obviously there had to be a reason behind his taking that stance and being a whistleblower, right? But they didn't take any of that into account, and they just, they didn't take any of his criticism on board, and then he was just flung out. And so this happens with Darulums, in Tabligh, in Tasawwuf, in the Maktab system as well. So we're not really allowed to criticize, and that applies to me as well, right? But because I've been in the Maktab system for decades, and because I run my own Maktab, therefore I'm going to mention some points which I have seen over the years, and which I see as weaknesses in the Maktab system. Some people might disagree, and they might say I'm against Maktab and so on and so forth, but Allah knows the truth. And I'm hoping that some or many people, especially scholars, will reflect upon what I'm saying. I'm not saying that all my points are valid and I'm right in everything I'm saying, but I'd like conversation, discussion over these points, and if I'm wrong, then I'd appreciate being corrected, right? So where can I start? The reason why I'm criticizing the Maktab system is because I want to see progression, and I want to see the advancement of our ummah. Because the Maktab system and the Maktab model that the first generation our parents, our grandparents created in this country was, and established in this country, was a very successful one. Right? So I'm not criticizing the system per se. I'm not saying, we should get rid of the maktab system. The maktab system that we inherited from the first generation was a very successful one. Why? Because what was their agenda, what were their goals, what were their targets behind setting up the maktab system in this country as migrants? So when they came, they realized that this is a non-Muslim country and there's a lot of lewdness and a lot of immodesty, and it's a very un-Islamic environment compared to the countries that they had come from. So they said that, right, we're going to live here, we're going to have kids, so we need to protect the iman of our children, and we need to make sure that they remain on Islam. That was the target of the first generation in establishing the maktab system. And by and large, they succeeded in protecting the iman of those kids, because very few people, you'll have heard of very few people within that first generation, second generation, in the 70s, 80s, 90s, very few people became murtad, turned renegade, left Islam, openly declared themselves as non-Muslims, right? And that generation, Generation X or whatever you want to call them, that generation, those people who are now in their 40s, 50s, 30s, 40s, 50s, they have a connection to the Deen generally, and the maktab system succeeded in creating a generation of people who have a passion for the Deen. And not only did that maktab system help to protect the Muslim identity of kids, but they produced many people who took pride in their Muslim identity, who pride themselves even today in their Muslim identity. You'll even find people who didn't become Hafiz or an Alim, but they're a product of the maktab system, and they become lifelong Namazi or lifelong Jamati, right, or lifelong Zakirin. Just as a result of the maktab system, they came out. They might not have become a Hafiz or an Alim, but they became Namazi. They never missed their namaz. Sometimes you'll even find people who don't pray their namaz, and yet they have a real passion for the Deen, and there's no compromise when it comes to giving up the Deen or selling the Deen, right? So that maktab system, the initial efforts of the pioneers, the first migrants, in setting up this maktab system, I think they succeeded. They produced these people with a real passion for Deen, people who, if they went on to become professionals, and then their voices were used to promote Deen, their pens are used to promote Deen. So many women, so many girls of that maktab system went on to become women who, mashallah, brought up very pious kids and went on to make their children Hafiz and Alim. Many women went on to set up maktabs in their own houses to teach the preliminary, primary kitabs and syllabus to children before they went on to the actual maktab system. So I think that the original maktab system succeeded in its time. Now what's happened is we have inherited that system. We, as in myself and people of my generation, we have not created, we didn't implement, we didn't we didn't lay the foundation of that maktab system. It was given to us on a plate, and so we carried it on, and alhamdulillah, for all these years, the masjids, the madrasas, the committees, the trustees, the Mauli Sahibs, the Appas have been running these systems, the maktab system, and teaching and producing huffaz and kids, and alhamdulillah, Allah Ta'ala accept everyone's efforts. But what I believe in is that we have gone into a state of stagnation now, and we're at the stage where the system, the maktab system, doesn't need revamping, right? I'm not talking about throw out the patlas, get them sitting on tables and chairs, mix up the classes, have boys and girls, and let's follow the secular model of the school system. I'm not saying that. We're not completely revamping the system. Right? There's a lot of good in the original system that we inherited. A lot of nuraniyat, a lot of ruhaniyat in there, a lot of spirituality in there. So I'm not talking about revamping throughout, the baby with the bathwater, right? But I think the system now in 2025 needs tweaking. So we need to leave things that are working. Mashallah, they're working well, so why fix them? Carry on. But we need to look at what isn't working. And when I say we're not open for criticism, because we're not open for criticism, the simple fact that we are failing in our ethos hasn't even occurred to us. Like I said, the original Maktab system, what was their target? What was their ethos? What was their goal and their aim? The goal and the aim was to protect our children's iman, make them remain as Muslims, make them deendar. And they succeeded in that to an extent. And they made a lot of sacrifices. The first generation, they weren't even qualified appas and molly sabs. They were factory workers and plumbers and so on, bus drivers. And yet they used to come and they used to teach us. So Allah Ta'ala bless them all, right? Now we need to take a step back and we need to think that what is the aim of the Maktab system in today's world? Why are we running these Maktab systems? Why are we making kids come for 2 hours, 3 hours after a tiring day at school? Why are parents making that commitment? Why are ustads and appas making that commitment? Why are committees and trustees and the management making that commitment? So we have to look at our goals, our aims. What is the goal of the Maktab system? Now, forgive me for saying this. Some people in I've got to choose my words carefully now. I don't want to upset people, but some people, committee members, if you like, or management running a masjid, and because the maktab is connected, is adjacent to the masjid, so it's part of the masjid. Maktab and masjid goes together. So some people tend to think that the maktab is a revenue generating machine. The ustads, the president, the trustees have a responsibility that the kids come out of the maktab with a passion for deen. That's a real goal. And yet some people tend to think that is just, let's get bums on seats, if you pardon the expression, get as many kids in as possible, charge them the fees, and you got a good revenue there, right? So some people, I'm not talking about the ustad, the alims and the alimas, they don't think like that, obviously, but some people in management do think like that. And that's why I said it's not just the ustad's responsibility to create deendar kids, but it's the responsibility of the committee members and the president and the trustees and the management and the ustads and the parents. It's everyone's responsibility. And we, at the end of the day, we're not answerable to Ofsted or to some organization. We are answerable to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. If somebody has attended our maktab and we've taken money from him or his parents for many years, and yet at the end of it he is disengaged, disenchanted, disinterested in Islam, leaves Islam, then we have a certain level of responsibility. We can't just say, he was a bad one. We've got to think that what did we do wrong to alienate him from the deen, or what could we have done more of to bring him closer to the deen. So if a maktab succeeds, the goal of our maktab really should be to create a passion for deen in our children. That's a responsibility of the ustad, the president, the trustees, the management, the parents, everyone working together, right? Even if that maktab doesn't produce a hafiz or an alim, or doesn't succeed in making that kid a hafiz or an alim, but we succeed in making that person deendar, he's got a passion for deen, we've succeeded. When I was teaching in schools, they had this government slogan, no kid left behind, no child left behind. And so they invested money in that, and they wanted every kid to achieve, right? So we should have that as our motto, no child left behind. Why? Because we're answerable to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And the criteria for success is not that the maktab is generating an income, and that we got more kids on the waiting list and we're oversubscribed. That's not a criteria for success. Unfortunately, many places have started thinking like that. Alhamdulillah, our maktab is full, we got loads of kids, that's it, we're a successful maktab. You're not. The population of the Muslims have grown, and alhamdulillah, parents have an inclination towards deen, so they're sending kids to maktab. So that's on them. That's their that's well done to them. But just filling the maktab is not the criteria for success. It's not the criteria for success. It's not the benchmark for success. Nor is the criteria for success how many hufaz or how many alims we have produced. That is not. That's a bonus. Alhamdulillah. That's something to brag about, something to be happy about. That's something to be envied for. Alhamdulillah, that we've produced this many hufaz, we've produced this many alims, alimas. Alhamdulillah. But that's not the benchmark. That's not the criteria for success. Why? Because a kid who's clever, whose parents are forcing him to become a hafiz, he'll become a hafiz. And he's got good ustads, he'll become a hafiz. But the criteria for success is, have we instilled in that child a passion for the Quran? Is he reciting the Quran after he completes his hifz? That's the criteria. Producing an alim, alima, it's in vogue now. Yes, it's the in thing to do. If you introduce your kids to somebody and they say, the first thing they'll ask you nowadays, oh mashallah, is he hafiz? And if you say no, you feel quite embarrassed. Or they'll say, oh mashallah, is he in alim class? Is she in alima? And you say no, then you'll be embarrassed. It's the in thing now. It's like a vogue, fashionable thing now. But so the criteria for success is not that we produce X number of alims or alimas, but is that alim performing his salat? Has he got full beard, sunnah beard? That's what we need to look at. If he has, then alhamdulillah, we're succeeding as a maktab. This alima, is she observing parda now? Right? After she's finished, right? She's studied Bukhari Sharif and Muslim Sharif and everything. How regular are they in their namaz? Right? Are girls observing parda? Are girls? Well, okay, that's that's a painful one. So let me mention the girls afterwards, because people really get their backs up about this. But let me talk about the boys. Are the boys leaving our maktab system? Are they regular with their namaz? How many of the lads that have left the maktab system have gone for 4 months without the tabligis chasing them? But coming out of the maktab system, they've been in the madrasa system, been exposed to deen for the last 10, 15 years of their life, 10 plus years of their life. Have they come out and said, yes, I want to do the effort of deen, I want to propagate Islam, I want to spread Islam, I'm ready for 4 months, I'm ready for 40 days. Right? If that's not happening, if at the end of the maktab journey, kids are just asking, when can I leave? They're doing the parents' head in, they're doing the Mawli Sahib's head in, when can I leave? Then there's a failing. How many of those boys who have left have realized that, hang on, They've done the alim course. They've become a Maulana in inverted commas, right? But they've left the Maktab system. They've done the 5 or 6 year course along with college and school and the part-time course. But after leaving, they realize that, hang on, this isn't the real deal. This isn't the real McCoy. This was just a taster. I can't even read Arabic properly without Arabs, without the vowels. I can't read with speed. I can't even translate the text properly, right? This alim course wasn't the proper thing. This was a taster. Now I want to go onto Darul and become a proper alim, right? Not just an alim by name or by label. How many boys have actually done that? That's a criteria. That's what we got to look at. How many girls, after leaving the alima class, have realized, hang on, that was just a taster. If I really want to become an alima, I'm going to have to go away into a darul, stay there in the sohba, in the company of neck pious apas, and study there and become a proper alima, like we had alimas in the 80s and the early 90s coming from England, having studied in Maligaon in India, right, which was a really, really tough madrasa because it's not in Gujarat. So in dire poverty and in extreme mujahada and heat, those girls, they studied, and those appas, even now, if you look in our towns, those appas are, far heads and shoulders above. No disrespect to the other appas who've done the 2-hour course, the part-time course, but it can't be denied that the appas that were produced by Maligaon Madrasa and the other madrasas afterwards, they are head and shoulders above in piety, in taqwa, in practice, in their passion for deen, and so on and so forth. Right? And if you look in England, those are the appas who've done the most work and continue to do the most khidmat, without taking anything away from the other appas. Right? How many of those boys are regular with 3 days in Jamaat every month? How many of those boys, without the tabligis, getting on their case, how many of them come for gasht? They've just been in the maktab system since the age of 4 sometimes, for the past, I don't know, 10 plus years, right? How many of those girls, now going on to the girls, how many of those girls observe niqab, full parda? How many, now I'm scared to say this because people get upset, but, like I say, criticism, there's criticism, there's spiteful criticism, which this is not, and there's productive criticism, and constructive criticism, which this is, right? Now, those girls, how many of those girls, okay, the facts of the matter is, look, we got these boys, they become alims in the part-time course, so they've been through the maktab system, or you get boys who haven't done the alim course, or they might have done hifz, or they've just done the kitabs. There are so many of them who don't pray namaz, and that can't be denied. That means that the maktab system, after so many years, has failed to instill the importance of namaz in their hearts. That means we've got to admit some level of failure. And then moving on to the girls, which, as you can see, I'm very reluctant to speak about, but it's got to be said. The nonsense that we're getting now, even from some of these so-called alimas who have graduated from part-time madrasa, maktab, they're coming out with this nonsense, the non-Muslim, anti-Islamic, Western, liberal, feminist nonsense. They spew the same kind of gojwara and filth. These are alimas who are spewing the same liberal, feminist, non-Muslim, anti-Islamic nonsense that we must delay starting a family for the sake of a career. You get that so much. I perform nikahs, and then I meet the guys, and mashallah, how's it going? Alhamdulillah, yeah, mashallah, good. So I said, mashallah, have you got any kids? No, wife doesn't want any kids now. Wife doesn't want any kids yet. She said in a few years' time. I'm thinking, your wife's an alima, so-called alima, meaning in the maktab system she studied, right? And that's not a Islamic view, is it? If we're honest with ourselves, if you want to brush it under the rug, then so be it. But if we're honest with ourselves and honest about our deen, the deen that was given to us by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, sent down by Allah ta'ala, passed on to us by Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, we have a responsibility towards that deen. We can't adulterate it, we can't change it, we can't deny it if we're going to be Muslims. So that you get these so-called girls who have apparently studied Islam, and yet they're saying we're gonna delay our having children for the sake of my career. And when they do eventually have kids, then it's limited to 2 kids. Hum do hamare do, ek ke baad abhi nahi, do ke baad kabhi nahi, and bacche to do hi acche, which are the slogans of the family planning world, in India and places like that, right? And that's in sharp contrast to the teaching of our deen and the saying of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, "Tazawwajul wadud al walud, fa inni mukathirun bikum al umam." Right? It's complete opposite. The family planning mentality goes against our deen. Right? So I say that how many girls have graduated from our maktab as alimas, studied Bukhari and Muslim and Nasai and all this, and then she's come out and she said to her dad that, listen, Dad, I don't want to go college anymore. Please find me a good dindar boy, right? Let me get married soon so that when I'm in the peak of my health, I want to mother healthy children and have plenty of children, so that I may also one day emulate the mother of Imam Bukhari and Imam Ghazali and the mother of Salahuddin Ayyubi, and I may also produce a Sheikhul Hind or a Hazrat Molana Thanvi or a Molana Ilyas Khandalvi Rahmatullah or Molana Zakaria Khandalvi Rahmatullah. Let me follow those mothers. They were mothers as well. That mindset should be created in a girl who studied the scriptures. There's no denying it. Whether you're not in agreement with, the Islamic thing, but there's no denying that it is an Islamic principle. That our parents, our grandparents, our grandmothers, if you look back, if you inquire, you'll find your grandmother, or your great grandmother, she got married at the age of 14. And mashallah, she had so many grandkids and so many kids. And mashallah, she did so well, and she was deendar, and she, mashallah, brought up a whole khandan, right? Because that was the teaching of Islam. Now, if you don't agree with that, and you agree with the Western model, that's up to you. But somebody who studied the scriptures, somebody who studied Deen and Bukhari Sharif and Hadith, should not be having that mentality. And if they are, then that means that the system has failed. So how many girls have we had coming out of the maktab system saying, right, I was studying in college, I was at university, but I don't want to do that anymore. It doesn't sit right with me, right? And Dad, just find me a boy. I want to get married. Find me a good boy. I want to get married. How many girls are considering sacrificing their careers to become a house mother, a housewife, a house manager, fulfill the role of a Muslimah, producing pious children who are deendar, nurturing the Islamic spirit in children, becoming like the mother of Molana Abul Hasan Nadwi Rahmatullah. Read her biography. She's a woman of the recent past. And those who were mothers, the mother's lap is the child's first madrasa. And yet you get girls who have not been through the maktab system. They follow the Western model, understandable, right? That's a trend of the time. Every girl wants a career. Girl wants to delay marriage and so on, have fun, and delay having children until later. Fair enough, right? But a girl who's been through the maktab system, if she's thinking like that, then then we got to introspect and we got to think. Hang on, instead of criticizing her, let's criticize ourselves and let's criticize our model. Where is it failing? There's so few girls coming out of the maktab system thinking like that. So there's so few boys coming out of the maktab system who are thinking along the lines of 4 months and going in Jamaat and praying my namaz and going on to a darulum and studying properly and being regular with their namaz. So the maktab system that we have inherited is failing because we have not progressed it. We are guilty of that. We've not progressed it. And I think I've given this a lot of thought. I've taught in many maktabs. I've traveled a lot. I've taught in London. And the other thing is, if a person, no disrespect, but if a person is just teaching maktab, has been teaching maktab for many years in Bolton, Preston, Blackburn, these kind of places, then they don't get a proper overview of the maktab system. It's when you go to areas where deen isn't as prosperous, when you go to London, when you get a melting pot of kids of all backgrounds. I've been to Ireland, and these areas which in terms of deen they're weaker, and they don't have the ulama and the apas and the models in place. When you go to those places, then you realize the real weaknesses of the maktab system. So after giving this a lot of thought and after trialing many things in my own maktab, I've come to the conclusion that the weakness in our maktab system are not the apas or the Molly Sabs. Alhamdulillah, they're doing a fantastic job on the whole. They're not the kitabs. The kitabs that we're using, mashallah, and Nasiha and Safa and all these, alhamdulillah, people have put a lot of effort in and produced fantastic kitabs, alhamdulillah. But I think that the weakness is in the syllabus itself. So the books that we've already got, alhamdulillah, they're very good. Not criticizing them, we should carry on with them. But there are gaps in our syllabus, in the curriculum of the maktabs, due to which our kids are becoming disengaged, disinterested, and this is leading to disengagement of the kids and lack of motivation in the deen, and then them drifting away from the deen and so on and so forth. So my point is that there's a weakness in the syllabus, and so we need to work on that. And very quickly, how does this connect? All this connect to my book? That's what we started talking about, isn't it, in the first podcast? Because you asked me to talk about the maktab system, that's why I've talked about the maktab system. How does all this come together? Well, I went to one maktab and they had something like 1,000 kids studying there. Massive maktab, one of the biggest in the country. So they were churning out about 100 kids that were leaving every year, right? So let's say half of those were girls, half of those were boys, which, in fact, there were more than that. But, I said to them that if you are producing 50 graduates every year, that means that 50 of your musallis should be increasing every year. Your masjid, the musallis performing namaz should increase by 50 every year. And yet, the masjid is empty in some namaz, and the namazis aren't really increasing, and the elderly are passing away. So that means that there's a flaw in our maktab system if we can't produce namazis. And so, and if girls are not willing to get married and settle down and start a family, if we're not creating that mindset, then there's a weakness as well. So I think that this weakness is in the syllabus, and that's one of the reasons why I've written this book. I think, what we tend to do is when we're told, or when we accept, or when we feel that there's a weakness in our maktab system, what we tend to do is, instead of thinking for ourselves and coming up with our own ideas and brainstorming our own ideas and having meetings, what we tend to do is we just look at the schooling model, the secular model, and we just pick things, rip things off from them. So, for example, maktabs went through, because I also deliver teacher training for maktab teachers, for madrasa teachers. Therefore, I remember we went through a period about a decade ago when some madrasas, some maktabs had the idea that we should do assemblies. That's what they do in school. Let's do assemblies, and that failed. You'll get very few maktabs now who still conduct assemblies, and the reason why it failed is a very simple one, but I won't go into that. But I predicted that it's going to fail. I told maktabs not to do it. I said there's another way around it. But anyway, that's a different thing. So we just rip ideas from them, right? Um, but there's no harm in taking ideas from them, because primarily they are usually Muslim models anyway, Muslim ideas anyway. But yeah, okay. So now let's look at the secular system, right? And many things work there. Many things we can't transfer over due to the um, prescriptions of our deen. But there are certain things which could work. So after giving it a lot of thought, I thought to myself, my own experience in school, when I was in primary school, in secondary school, and then teaching in school. I've been a teacher about 25 years now. In secondary school, I've also taught in colleges. I've taught in many schools up and down the country. So taking all of that experience and taught in many maktabs, taking all that experience, putting it into one, and then giving it a lot of thought and pondering hard what works in the school system, what could we transition over, bring over. So one of the things is reading. One activity which in my days as a pupil, and also in my days as a teacher, which I observed, a thing that really helped engage kids and stopped misbehavior and brought about a team spirit and a togetherness was class reading. And the way that this works in the secular system is, in primary school they have a designated carpeted area. Kids are called over, usually near the end of the day, and teacher says, right, fingers on lips, everyone sit down, hands, arms folded, I'm going to read a story to you. And then she reads to them, and the kids get lost in the book, and they absolutely love it. I remember my teacher in primary school read to us Charlotte's Web. That's one of the books I remember her reading to us. We used to love it. We used to look forward to it. Anyway, then along with that, kids are encouraged to go to the library and get books. Then in secondary school, the same thing. In secondary school, kids are still, at the beginning of the year 7, they're given library cards. They're encouraged to go to library, and kids are given books or told to choose books which they should read. They can read one day a week in the tutor time, and that's usually when the kids mess around. But then in English lessons, they have book reading, which they read as a class together, and that really creates a good spirit in the kids, and it stops misbehavior, and really engages the kids. So I remember when I was teaching, although I wasn't an English teacher, from my in the last 20 odd years, I've observed English lessons. My English colleagues, have spoken to them. So when I was at school, we read in year 9 The Outsiders by S.E. Hinton. Fantastic book, really created a team spirit and a closeness, and really engaged us and all this sort of stuff. And then sometimes it was Wuthering Heights, and then going on to then Shakespeare, Romeo and Juliet, and Macbeth and Pride and Prejudice, Jane Austen. And then when I started teaching, although I wasn't an English teacher, Stone Cold in year 7 or year 8, which is a very good book about homelessness. And then they had also The Diary of Adrian Mole, age 13 and 3/4, which is a good laugh. Kids love that. And then Holes, sometimes, which got made into a Disney film. Kids love all that sort of stuff. And then more recently, The Boy in the Striped Pajamas, which, these are all propaganda pieces. The Zahn Sazi, the winning of hearts and minds is going on. It's subtle, but it's all going on through these books. And then you have Good Night, Mr. Tom, and all these kind of books. Anyway, so that gave me the idea that in madrasa, with the older kids especially, because with the way we try to engage our kids is we introduce these books. Like I've mentioned before, we had Hindustani Qaida on the first page. There were pencil drawings or pen drawings, and we used to love that page. We used to always look at that page, because of the drawings. So now somebody had the idea that okay, kids like colourful pictures. So now in these new curriculum books, they've got nice, pictures created by good artists and media, and so you've got really good pictures. And those, kids love all that, but you can't hope to engage a 14-year-old with pictures of a mountain and a hot air balloon and clouds and a ship and Noah's Ark, Noah alayhi Salam's Ark, and all that sort of stuff, right? So it works to a certain age, but then afterwards, what about that gap, from 13 to 16 kind of thing? How do you engage the kids? And I've mentioned before that, the intelligent kids, even the younger, even the 11-year-olds, the really intelligent ones, they've said to me, and they mentioned, and the older kids have definitely said, madrasa is boring, we just do the same old. It's wuzu every year, ghusl every year, tayammum every year, is just rehashing the same maslas, right? So that's why I thought that, look, if there's a storybook like this, one, it's exciting, it's engaging, kids can relate to the characters, there's a plot, there's a twist, there's a direction, there's cliffhangers, so kids are looking forward to reading it. Also, so it'll create a team spirit and something that they can look forward to. It'll engage the kids, and also it'll improve their literacy, because we read it together, and it'll improve their literacy, their reading skills, their writing skills, and then that can branch off to so many projects that they could do, and I've always said I would very gladly and for free I'd come into maktabs and I'd talk about the book and the instigation behind the ideas behind the book, the motivation behind writing the book, and all this sort of stuff, and share some of my, in inverted commas, expertise with kids. I'd happily do that. And, that would really engage the kids. How many times do you have an outside speaker coming in and talking about something relevant, something that the kids can relate to? I mean, 7 Down, 6 Up, it's only been out. It only arrived last Wednesday, and today's Monday. And, the kids have read it, gone through it really quickly. And already, I'm getting reviews where kids have said in the past as well, and kids are saying now as well, some of them, I want to be a writer. They've been inspired. So if through that book we can engage the kids in maktab, and then even if we don't produce Hafiz Alim, not everyone can become a Hafiz Alim Alima, but if that kid gets inspired to write and has at the same time a spirit for Islam and a passion for Islam, and then he or she goes on to become a journalist, all right, or a writer, and they promote Islam through their pen, then we've succeeded as a maktab, even though we didn't produce a Hafiz or an Alim. At the moment, our benchmark is Hafiz Alim produced, alhamdulillah, we're successful. But there it will be a journalist success created, a doctor created, a teacher created, a politician created, but a deendar politician, journalist, writer created, alhamdulillah. Maktab system succeeded. We need more Mahdi Hassans, no matter what his views might be, what his beliefs might be, but you've got to give credit where it's due. the guy is a gem. I've read his book on debating, and he wipes the floor with these guys. And we need 1,000 Mahdi Hassans in today's climate. Look at what's going, to counteract the P.S. Morgans of the world. We need more, because they're producing P.S. Morgans all the time. Their factories are churning them out. So we got our maktabs have to churn out these Mahdi Hassans and these Molana Qasim Nanotwis and Molana Ilyas Sabs and the Appas and the mothers in the same way. Anyway, there's a lot more to say, but you got to stop me on these things.
I'm not saying that we make our maktabs into circuses, right? We don't compromise on our deen. I've seen that happen as well. Certain places I've seen when we go in Jamaat, maktab is like 1 hour a week on a weekend, and kids just come around and cause havoc in the building and play football, have a kick around, and that's the end of it. And the younger kids, they colour in and stuff. I'm not saying that. I'm not saying we make it into a circus. I'm not saying we compromise our teachings. But what I'm saying is that so you have the extremes. You have the ones that just say, okay, let the kids enjoy themselves in the masjid, let them do whatever they want, so that they remain attached to deen, and so we'll bring football in and archery and all that sort of stuff, right? That's one extreme. The other extreme is that no, it's all academic, just get them studying. So that's another extreme where kids get bored. So this is like the middle ground, according to the teachings of Islam, without compromising our Shariat, without compromising our academia. Kids are still learning. Obviously, there's going to be an element of difficulty in learning, right? So we're not going to compromise that. Just as in schools and colleges, there's difficulty, there's homework and all this sort of stuff. And yet, despite that, the kids still like it. Why? Because the element of fun and stuff and the element of engagement is still there. So I'm saying is through these books, we bring in an element of engagement where kids are finding their voice, the kids can relate, kids are enjoying, whilst at the same time still studying hard and still learning. But the main thing is engagement, that they look forward to coming. And, in private maktabs, like mine is a private maktab, so I've seen this happen. When you've got a kid who didn't go to school because he was ill, but he still comes to the maktab, and the parents send a note saying that, look, we told him not to come, he's not well, but he's decided to come, so can you let him out a bit early or something, right? Then you're on a winner. When kids, back in the days, it was like kids would go to school, but they wouldn't go madrasa, bunk of madrasa, right? But when you manage to turn that on its head and you get kids who didn't go to school for valid reasons and yet still insist on coming to the maktab because they don't want to miss the fun and miss the lessons and miss the learning, then you know that you're onto a winner. So I'm not saying that we compromise everything, but by bringing these kind of books in, I think, wallahu alam, your views and people's views are most welcome. That's why I gave my email address, o.b.kazee@mail.com. Or if you have my WhatsApp number, then you can message me or pass your messages on to the host, and they can pass them on to me. But I think that by bringing these books in, works of fiction, storybooks that are exciting, that have a plot, that have characters, relatable characters, not only will it improve their literacy, which will have a positive impact on their schoolwork, but it will also inspire them to write and to read the right kind of thing, and also there'll be that element of excitement and engagement. So that's what I'm saying. We are not above reproach in the system. We have to take on criticism. We have to internalize, introspect, and we have to be able to discern the good from the bad, the positives from the negatives, what's working, what isn't working, what can be tweaked, what can be changed, and how can it be changed. For example, I know I mentioned earlier the assemblies, right? So now for about 10 plus years, I've been delivering Maktab teacher training to Maktab teachers, Madrasa teachers. So in that, I've always said, because many Maktabs at that time, when I started the training program, at that time somebody had the idea that, okay, let's look at the school system. What do they have? And oh yeah, they have assemblies. So let's start assemblies in our Maktab. So from day one, I was saying that, look, that's a bad idea. That's not going to work. It doesn't work for a number of reasons, and I was right in what I said, because now most of those, I think all of those maktabs that started the assemblies, they've all, stopped. The assemblies have died a death, right? For a number of reasons, and I predicted the reasons beforehand, and those became the reasons for them stopping. I said, for example, in schools we have assemblies first thing in the morning. Kids don't go to their classroom; they come straight into the hall, and then we have an assembly. And in the assembly, they have outside guests speaking. They have different teachers, and it's engaging. Oh, it's boring, but the messages get through and all that sort of stuff, right? So what I was saying is that in usually maktabs that did the assemblies, what they did was, it was the last half hour of a Friday. So it's been a long week, and then at the end of that week, right, so when kids are dying to go home, teachers are dying to go home, at that time, right, herd all these kids to the hall, right? And then we're restricted in terms of space as well in maktabs. Corridors are small and narrow, and you got like 200, 300 kids, plus kids, being shepherded to the hall, and it's mayhem, right? And then the kids, once they get out of the classroom, they just think that, right, we're going home. So in the assembly, they're messing around, and they're fidgety, and then the other problem we have is also that none of the teachers are willing to step up and to deliver the assembly. So no, you do it, and no, you go in Jamaat. No, you're an imam of a masjid, you do Jummah bayans, you got practice, you do it. So you tended to fall on one head, and then that person would get burnout, and then he'd give up, and that was the end of that. So there's a better model, a better way of doing that, which I'll give you some time, which I suggested from day one, an assembly of sorts, but in a different manner, in a more manageable manner, something that wouldn't be a logistical nightmare. Anyway, so we're taking things from the school system, the good, and we're trying to implement them, but we have to tweak them so that they fit in with our maktab model, with the dini knowledge that we're imparting. So with these books as well, I think it needs to be, I'm not saying that we wipe the whole slate and start from zero and start again and revamp the whole system. The system that we've got is working, but it's got weaknesses. So within that, as I mentioned, the syllabus doesn't need to be changed. Alhamdulillah, we've got fantastic books out there, the Nasiha series and Safa and all these. So carry on with that, but then also try to introduce these kind of books and group reading, group activities, and then with that leads to so many discussions, or even homework, or even projects. Lab books kids can make. For example, you discuss a point in the book, and then you take it forward and say, what would you do in that situation? So I've got a whole list of activities that are related to my book, for parents and for teachers, which I'll be happy to share. So I think that then that will improve the literacy as well. When I first started teaching, I had a notebook in which I had collected these articles, and so I would pose to the kids a question. I would say, for example, why did Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam have so many wives? And then, the argument from the Orientalists and the A'dauddin, the opposition that, that's just wrong and whatever, right? So then I would pose that question and then the answer. So I would actually dictate the answer to them, right? And they loved it. It would take 2-3 weeks. Sometimes we'd do little bits, right? And in dictating to them, what would happen is, one thing is that it improved their writing and the speed of their writing, and it extended their vocabulary. I carefully chose words, and I told them that you can use this in school. This is what this word means and stuff, vocabulary that was relevant to their age. And also then by the end of it, they'd have the 4, 5, 6 pages written in their book, every single one of them. And the other thing is, in dictating, you don't get the misbehavior, because everyone settles down. And if anyone's messing around, if anyone's calling out, everyone just slates him, because they say, shut up, we're missing the dictation. So I used to go slowly, but then after we'd done this for over a year, then I could, dictate whole sentences, and they could write them, and that really improved their literacy and their writing skills and their vocabulary. So these kind of things, which in the Dini setting, which also lend towards their dunyawi, their secular education, and it will help them get their grades. And because of that, then, we'll produce literate pupils who can excel in the workplace, in their career. But if they've also got the passion for Deen, then their progression is also the progression of Deen. I think it was Akbar Ilhabadi rahmatullahi who said, Allah Ta'ala grant him Jannat, मुसलमान ने जो तरक्की की गैर होकर, ये गैरों की तरक्की है, मुसलमान की नहीं. मुसलमान ने जो तरक्की की गैर होकर, when a Muslim progressed in a field, but he was not religious, he didn't have deen in him, and he'd sold out his deen and, become like the non-Muslims, then ये गैरों की तरक्की है, मुसलमान की नहीं, then Islam की नहीं, then that progression and that success is not the success of Muslims and Islam. That's success, that's another notch in the belt of the non-Muslims. So Islamic identity is very important, and I think the main role of the Maktab is to reinforce that Islamic identity and that Islamic passion, and for that we've got to think of ways to do that, and this is just one suggested method from me. I hope I didn't offend anyone. I hope you've benefited, and there's a lot of food for thought in all of this, so please do give it thought, discuss it with your peers, and if you want to discuss it with me, then as I've said, I've given my details, and then I'll be happy to, if I'm wrong, I'm not above reproach. If I'm wrong, I'll happily hold up my hand and say, okay, I'll backtrack on that. I'll take that statement back. But discussion is important, and brainstorming and sitting together, coming up with ideas, and having a fikr and a worry and concern as to what we need to do to improve the system, I think is very important.